Teachers get upset that you're talking about. Whereas when you just talk about play, it's everything, isn't it?
I think also, though, I mean, So all ready for the white page?
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the big debate. It's so good to see you all. I'm Leah Boletto, former Newsround presenter and now freelance journalist. And I just want to introduce my fab panel today because we're going to be discussing engagement in sport and play post-pandemic and how we can improve it for the young people of England. So I have the wonderful Dame Rachel de Souza, Children's Commissioner for England. We have the amazing Alison Oliver, Youth Sports Trust CEO. And we also have Lisa Thavers, Chair of the Well School Board and Bright Futures and Director of Development, also Partnerships and Teaching School Hubs. And we also have Kieran Matthews, the Youth Sports Trust Board member and teacher in training as well. Teacher in training. Big props to you, Kieran. I think we all agree, don't we, that there is a real desire after hearing Ali's speech to engage in young people and their desire to sort of bounce back from this pandemic healthier, more resilient, and most importantly, happier. But there is a big discrepancy, isn't there, in terms of equality and that engagement in sport for young children, depending on where they are in the country. We will be opening up questions from the audience, so if you do have a burning question, please do wave at me, and we've got Emily with a mic, so we'll be able to connect you with the panel here. So, if we cast our minds back to 2020, in that first lockdown, we were all told to stay at home, and that includes our children too. And that meant a lack of connection with others, that meant a lack of connection with play, and that had a real impact on their mental well-being. And it's so great to hear from Dame Rachel de Souza and her findings from that amazing survey, 500,000 children, saying actually they want to connect with communities again. And one of the biggest things for them is play, and that's so reassuring. But there is still so much that can be done and that needs to be done. And I wonder, Dame Rachel de Souza, if you could just outline, if you had a wish list for what needs to change, what would it be?
Oh, golly, there's a question. So I think in terms of, I argued really strongly coming out of lockdown that the thing that before we even got ourselves worried about catch up and maths and English and we needed to actually sort out children's well-being. And in our survey, we asked them what that meant because, what is it? What is it you need? And they told us they wanted to be together, play together. They wanted to get support where they had trust, which is from school. So some of the things I've been arguing for are more money into longer days so that catch-up can happen in those longer days, and actually we can make sure that all the social work stuff, the play, the being together can happen when it should. Sport can be back on the curriculum. We knew, you wouldn't believe how many times children spoke to us about, when I asked them the question you've asked me, it was more sport, more activities, more time together, and for mental health and well-being, being able to access support at school, where we trust people, whether that's a counsellor, whether that's to digital support, whether that's just talking to a trusted adult. Back in those early moments, it was very much, how do I even make friends again? Mm-hmm. Or I'm so upset because this, I haven't seen Granny for so long. It was very much about social things. So I would have loved to have, never mind eat out to, what was it?
Help out to eat out.
Eat out to help out. I wanted something for schools and for children during that summer I'd have loved to have seen like an activity passport for children to be able to be actually doing things together and actually accessing the kinds of things they've told us that they want. So that's very much where I'm coming from. I'm still worried. I'm still looking at attendance figures now. What would they be normally? About 95% at this time of year. As a head, I would be expecting to see something like that. We've gone from like 87% up to about 90% since January, and we know there are concerns around, staff having to be off because of illness. But when I look at those attendance figures, I've been talking to children about why are you not back at school? Some just haven't bothered coming back. there's also mental health concerns, children with SEND not getting their needs met. We need to deal with those things first. But kids have told us loud and clear they want activities, they want to be together, they actually want the social side of things sorting. Then, we can get on with our maths and English.
Brilliant. And I think that ties in so well, doesn't it, with the message from the Youth Sports Trust and this conference and what you said, Ali, about connecting with communities. Is that where the idea came from, the fact that children were perhaps lagging in contact, as basic as it goes?
So, I mean, it was, I physically, one of the most important things I did was actually going out and talking to children in that sort of April, May time. So, as I said, I was, everywhere from Bristol to Handsworth to Luton and the stories children told me were about, I can remember two young twins saying how, their mum had serious health or mental health issues. She was totally isolated. They had to look after her. You had kids talking about, dad was a delivery driver or a parent was a nurse. They were frightened, so they missed their contact, they missed school, and they were dealing with some quite tricky things. Now, they are resilient, they are back now, but I still think there is that desire for connection, the desire for connection with each other, in communities, at school, that that's where I would, frankly, be putting my pound if I was thinking about catch-up.
And Ali, it'd be great to bring you in here because I guess that is the essence of your forward-thinking plan of connecting with communities because it starts in the grassroots, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, wonderful to hear the Children's Commissioner talk about how young people view schools as being the safe and trusted place. And it's also the easiest place for many young people to get to, particularly for play and sport. We know, many of you know, sitting here, that after-school sport, particularly in physical activity, has become monetised. It's now big business. And lots of money can be made in running after-school clubs for parents who are unable to get childcare and need that. But of course, what that means is it just broadens the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And there are young people who desperately need to be in wraparound care or doing positive activities for an extended school day. And they sort of get the double whammy because not only do they miss out on that, but they end up in, antisocial behaviour and places where they shouldn't be, and the crisis deepens. So, for us, absolutely, if we could somehow do two things really here, is transform society's attitudes and perceptions of the importance of play in children's lives. That would be huge. I think every parent I speak to, whether that's in a school or in my own friendship circle, they're at their wits' end what to do with teenagers at the moment. There are lots of struggles and challenges going on in homes. And we somehow need to reach those parents and say there is an answer. There is something you can do. But what we also need to do is make it affordable and accessible, because if that then requires investment of funds that aren't available in the home, and goodness me, I heard about the hike again in fuel cost rises today, it's going to be really difficult for the most disadvantaged to do anything. So if the school day could be extended, that community that the child knows in the school, particularly if we can get primary schools onto secondary school sites as part of that extended school day so that they're learning about where they're heading next in education, and then use the brilliance of the profession to make sure that what we give young people is inclusive, accessible, meaningful, and most of all, connects them to each other, just gives them the socialisation that they so desperately need. I know you said one thing, but those would be my two big asks.
I welcome those. Lisa, it'd be interesting to explore the challenges, I suppose, because they're wonderful ideas, but what challenges do you think schools will face in trying to engage and make this a reality?
Hi, thank you. So, in terms of challenges, there are so many challenges. Schools are under a huge amount of pressure in terms of the current accountability framework, outcomes, Ofsted, teacher well-being is a challenge at the moment. So, thinking about layering on, extra pressure on schools, it's really tough. But for me, I think, we're preaching to the converted here. Everybody would agree that happiness and health is possibly the most important thing to our children from a teacher perspective and from a parental perspective. So for me, it's about how do we perhaps harness the power of the young people's voice like we did last night, perhaps harness the power of the parent voice in order to influence those policymakers and to perhaps influence the accountability framework, because it's really tough for schools to fit everything in that we have to fit in. So I think it is about being creative. It's also about thinking about enrichment in a creative way. So, you know, if every school did the Daily Mile, and Ali taught yesterday about the Duke of Edinburgh, all those things help to get kids moving more. But then we do have to make sure that we don't forget about physical literacy as well, because what we're seeing is year 3, 4 and 5 kids coming back after the various lockdowns with not some of those basic fundamentals of movement, so throwing and catching, agility, coordination, balance. Some of them have missed some of those fundamentals out, so that means it's really hard for them to then engage in sport in a way that they feel they can achieve and do well at. So we have to plug that gap, we have to go back, we have to narrow that gap, because, you know, for many of us in lockdown, it was a stark reminder of how different it is for different families. So there's some families that had time to take the kids out in open spaces. Some families didn't have open spaces. Some families, like Rachel said, were actually out being key workers, so the kids were either in school, you know, with limited amount of teachers. So it's very, very different. So I think we have to go back to basics and absolutely, like Rachel said, think about recovery in terms of PE and sport. Think about PE and sport connecting to the RSHE and PSHE curriculum in a really holistic way. And when we think about some of the safeguarding issues that we have in school, you know, often physical activity, that social prescribing model is the answer.
And it's interesting because, Kieran, you have worked with children for the last 5 years, haven't you? And you're a teacher, 10, a teacher in training as well. What are children saying to you? Because it feels like perhaps the messaging, maybe from government, that sport is this 60-minute activity that you should do a day. Should it not be more fluid and part of the whole curriculum as you move through the afternoon?
Well, personally, I don't believe like sport should just be a tick box exercise for most schools. Within the school I work with, it's a high demand sports school, has performance academies across the age groups and stuff. Again, if you offer a 60-minute lesson per day, that 60-minute lesson very quickly becomes a 40, 30-minute lesson after you get kids changed and actually ready to do a sport. It is a difficult one to tackle because obviously in a school you have to deal with maths, English, science, actually getting grades, actually making sure students are academically viable. But at the same time, they need to be physically viable and able to attain things, not just as high-level athletes, but as people as well.
Would you like to add to that, Lisa?
Yeah, I was just going to say, some of the things and the ways that we've worked in lockdown, we've actually learned from. So there are lots of primary schools and secondary schools that allowed their children to come into school wearing the PE kits on the days they had PE to reduce the lesson changeover time, the getting change time. And in primary school, that can often be 20 minutes plus, can't it? So actually, some schools have carried on with that. So gaining that extra time. And, you know, they're only marginal gains, aren't they? But they are important gains across a week or across a month in terms of time.
Rachel, I wonder if you could just build into that conversation, because you were hearing from children from across the country who were saying to you they have such a need, you know, to connect with other people. And it's interesting what you were saying about that boy-girl divide. Is there a time now where we just place an emphasis on sport rather than dividing it up into the genders so that everyone is just part of that sport messaging?
So I think there are a range of things on there. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I mean, I am as proud of my elite sports, young sports boys and girls who've achieved great things, have gone on to achieve great things, and would always in school want to make the space and foster that. I'll be the one advocating for, you're not just doing rounders over summer. We're going to do the full athletics. We're going to do the lot. So I think there's something really important about physical education and, you know, and sport being seen as extremely serious and part of the life of our school and our nation, actually. And I'm a big pro supporter of that. But I think there's a whole other thing that children have talked to me about, and I think that we all know and understand implicitly here, which is about the social side of activities. You know, I think of my old Norwich Primary Academy where they do Zumba every night. I mean, I have led the mile. I have led the school mile. I don't, even though I'm, physically not whatever. Those things that are about everybody being able to take part, enjoy their physicality, feel great doing it, and being very social as well. And 100% support whatever it takes, basically. And different schools, different communities are going to want to do different things. Like I say, Luton, we want Luton-wide cricket competitions, and that was, everywhere I went there was slightly different responses. But my view is, as school leaders, we can be asking our children, looking at their interests, introducing them to new things. Absolutely, boys and girls. One of the most marked things about post-lockdown, I was talking about being in Bolton. The children saying, I've become fat, I've become unhealthy. And what we're going to do about it. And it was actually the older children saying, let's put lots of activities on. And those two ESSA academies are primary and secondary doing it. So, and let's think about what we eat. And let's think about keeping ourselves well. And then we can go on to achieve. And the link there. Now, the children were doing that with their peer mentors, led skillfully by the staff around them. But they really caught that. So there are lots of ways we can do this.
And is that your message to education leaders then, to follow the lead of the children, because that's when it works best?
Listen, when we've got Will Quince running marathons and transforming himself, absolutely. But we have to do it by example, don't we? And actually, I'm feeling very guilty. I need to go do some Zumba now and do it with the kids. But we should, we should absolutely be leading by example.
And Ali, I wonder if we could bring you in at this stage, because there will be questions from head teachers who are saying, we have so much that we're dealing with in terms of literacy and getting on top of mathematics. How can we on earth then start to push extra sporting classes? What's your message to them when they already have so much pressures on their shoulders already?
I suppose there's a few ways I would respond to that. One is, we know, and Rachel referenced it earlier, children who are well and who play regularly do better. So this is not saying we're asking you to do less education and more play and sport. We're saying play, sport, physical activity is part of the education process, and it develops attributes, skills and competencies which fundamentally underpin learning. And I've seen enough research to be able to say that confidently, that it's not a personal opinion, this is true. So there's something here again, it's for us in our new strategy to get our heads around, but how do we get some of that messaging out? So it's common acceptance that if we want children to learn well, they're active. We now have, and some of you have heard me say before, we now have an understanding, if someone has dementia and they have issues with memory and cognitive functioning, we keep them active and keep them exercising because it plays such an important role in the brain and the brain's performance. But we haven't got that message yet across in terms of young people's development, and that needs to be there. But if we had a brilliant schools white paper, for me, what it was set out to do is reimagine education and say, not just what does the requisite standard look like for English and maths, and absolutely agree with the white paper that we should be expecting, that sets out 90%, it should be every child reach the expected standard. But we have no standards for physical, social and emotional health. So not only do teachers not have a sense of what they're driving towards when they're developing this, but parents have no idea, and some of that stuff about teenagers being a nightmare is they are going to be. That is an expected standard for a teenager. They're going to rebel, they're going to be challenging. But how do you know that as a parent? And how do you know when you see your child walk, whether they are physically developed sufficiently to avoid injury and problems in later life? And also when you see them play with friends, how do you know they've got the level of social development that they should have? So I think there's something here in, not academia, because I don't want to bury this in a load of research and benchmarking frameworks, but there is something relatively simple to be done in simply helping parents to understand what good looks like in terms of the social emotional development of the children, and this myth busting that sport is something you do when your academics are done, as you said. We don't put sport in the extended school day because school needs to happen in what was the traditional. We make the traditional school day physically active because that's how we learn.
Do you feel that there is enough being done by government to help support some of the plans that you have in place, and also Dame Rachel, whether it's you're happy with the level of support that you're getting so far from government.
Yeah, so, well, do you want to...
I'm happy to kick off, but
Yeah.
I think it's not talked about enough. So I think this government's approach is laudable. You know, school leaders know how to run their schools. Let's let them get on with it. But actually, the department should be there championing some really important principles of education, and we don't hear this principle championed enough. So I think there is more that could be done, but there's a job for charities like ours and other organisations to help school leaders understand this insight and research which can enable them to lead their own schools better. So I do think there's more to be done, but helping the profession do the very best job for the children needs other organisations like ours to support.
Yeah, so I think there's growing. I think the pandemic and coming out of lockdown has given us an opportunity to land this wider issue. And I agree. I'm hoping that the school's white paper, but also the SEND green paper and the care review are going to give us a raft of a new legislation approach that actually put the well-being of children right at the heart and the centre of it. And I know I've been pushing hard on some of those areas. I think there's a growing understanding. I think if you talk now, you know, I've talked to Sajid Javid about this, I talked to the Education Minister about this, I've talked to everyone about this, and the understanding is there. I think it's the profession, and it's ours, it's the charity who are going to need to show the way and lead the way. And I think there is a really big issue about how we can model and inspire parents to really take that kind of well-being, children's well-being, health, healthy eating, physical. I mean, when I was a child, I don't know what it was like for you. It's a long time ago, but I mean, we'd be out playing all day. I mean, that was life. Mum would put you out. You'd go out with your group of friends from the street, and you'd be out all day. Now, I didn't bring my, in the 90s when my son was born, when some of you were born, I mean, already that wasn't happening. And now we've got a generation of children who are often sitting in front of screens, playing their competitive feelings channeled into gaming. And we know that's a reality. So the big question for me is, how do we move away to make going outside possible and compelling and safe? And that's why I picked up on all of those issues. School is critical. I mean, I really like the holiday and food programme. So I went around all summer looking at the holiday and food programme. Now, I know it's for a particularly distinct group, but we saw children then in parks, on beaches, having people actually overseeing positive activities in safe places and where they could get fed as well. Now, that was for a particular group of free school meal to children, but we need it we need that kind of approach nationally. I think we need to, bring back the freedom of active play. But I know for us as adults, our worry is going to be around safety. As adults and parents, the worries around safety and those kinds of things. And we need to find, as a society, not just a government, not just a group of teachers, a way of dealing with that. Because childhood is completely different, isn't it, to our, to the kind of childhood I'm describing in the 60s and 70s.
And there's always thoughts, isn't there, about extending. You've touched on extending the school day, but there has been over, I think, the last 10 years, a reduction of youth centres for children to have that safe space to play and connect with other children. I wonder, Kieran, would you be in favour of perhaps schools being, that hub, taken over at the end of the school day as youth hubs? I mean, how can we work it that there are those safe places for children to go and play and connect with sport?
So the only question I'd have with that is, so if the school was to be a youth hub, does that mean the teachers are then the
This
staff?
is all up for discussion. This is it, because, Dame Rachel D'Souza, you mentioned that, didn't you, that having that safe space in the 90s where you could just go out, and as we've moved on and it's having that sort of connection to screens, where do we start to make places of safety for children to go and play cricket or tennis or kick a ball about, because there isn't that space anymore.
Absolutely, and just in terms of like the policy environment, so we've got a schools white paper about to come out. I think it will talk about families of schools at the centre of this, and I would expect to be seeing greater roles clarified for roles and responsibilities around local authorities, and then families of schools as the way. That would be my guess. Now, in those sort of families of schools, I think lots of us are used to working in those trusts. My question is there a place for youth work, for the delivery of wider services that are not about teachers doing them necessarily, but that are about creating? So that's in answer to your question. But there's also DCMS with its youth fund. Now, is there something that could be streamlined there to actually help the delivery of services? So I think we all know what we want. I think the policy environment might well take us in a certain direction.
Do you feel there's any fluidity with what you want and the policy?
Yes, I do, and I think it's about. I've always feel with I'm totally independent and neutral politically. I don't think any of them are good enough. So basically, the policy environment means that. I think you tend to just have to grasp it and work it to deliver what we need to deliver for children, basically. And that's where I think we could possibly use what's coming out to actually get a new... I keep talking about New Deal for Children. When 9-year-olds are worried about their jobs, when 40% of 16-year-old girls are telling me they've got anxiety and mental health problems, when we've got kids gaming and spending their life on social media, we've got to do something. And you are clearly part of the answer. And, and we need to be ambitious and bold. New Deal for Children.
That's it. It's a new deal for children there. Lisa, what do you think the appetite is from schools, from head teachers?
I think that the appetite would absolutely be there, and I think that what's been really refreshing is just to clarify that actually we're not asking schools to do more, we're asking schools to do what we should be doing. And for me, it's we wouldn't dream about trying to teach children maths and French and other things like that unless they have those basic skills of literacy. So I think it is about reframing things so that actually we see physical activity and physical literacy in the same way that we do literacy. It's an access subject. If we make sure that children are moving more and they've got that high quality PE and exercise, then actually they will be able to access the rest of the school day in a much more effective way. The teachers will have better lessons, the children will behave better, the children will be more switched on, they'll concentrate. And in terms of the community stuff that you've talked about, what I don't want to do is leave people thinking that actually schools aren't doing some of that after school stuff, because they absolutely are. There are thousands of schools with teachers staying after school every day to put on a raft of amazing and enriching clubs in art, drama, PE, different sports, physical activity, Zumba, all that sort of stuff. Some schools have been slower to get back to that because of COVID, but others picked it right up straight away and saw that it was central. But any extra support in terms of that enrichment offer from multi-academy trusts, from the community, from those club links in the community, would obviously be really welcomed.
Kieran, what are your students telling you at the moment and their state of play? We've heard a lot, and it's great to hear that 80% of children are happy, and that's fantastic. But it'd be good to hear from the children that you're working with, their thoughts on their sporting future and their mental well-being when it comes to sport and play.
Just to give some background to it, I run a basketball academy in North London, which is in Harlesden/Neasden. It's one of the worst places in the country, I'll say hands down. The positives that come from the kids that I've been working with, they just want to do sport. They don't care if they're particularly high performers, like while we have exit routes for them, they just want to do sport. And that's from the 11-year-olds up to the 19-year-olds, from the kids who are 6'8" and can jump over me to the 11-year-old who just wants to do something with his friends. Kids in general are happy as long as there's different things for them, because obviously not every kid wants to do football, not every kid wants to do basketball. As long as there's open avenues and different things for them to do, they're relatively happy.
And see, I think that's really key to get across, isn't it? I feel like it's quite a simple goal, isn't it? Offering sport to all without it being competitive. That's quite key, isn't it, to what the Youth Sports Trust are doing, Ali?
Yeah, I mean, we're
competition is a really interesting one. I think it's a great subject for a big debate. Let's have it. Fundamentally, competition has been bent right out of shape. So sport, when we're talking about sport is competitive. It's part of the definition, it's there. Unfortunately, for 100 years, school sport has been about winning competition. It's not been about the value of competing and working together as part of a team and using your opposition to help stretch you as far as you can go. All of those bits about what competition is about have sort of been lost, and it's been about trophies and cups. It's about who can win. And hence what's happened, and I can say this as a former PE teacher, I spent all my time selecting those that were good enough to compete and telling all those that weren't good enough, competition's not for you. Whereas what we do know, and Em's standing over there who leads on the school games programme for government, is children love to compete. They're just not, A, bothered about who wins, they just want the competition, and T, they don't want to be told who they can be playing with and who they can't be playing with. They want to play with their friends and want to enjoy that side of it. So I think it's inevitable, 100 years of school sport being run around who's the best, which is the best school. You know, the national schools competition is used to be the prestigious thing that every PE teacher wanted to get to. We've moved beyond that, but again, the narrative hasn't seeped out of the echo chamber that we work in. So I know the people sitting around here know everything I'm saying, but when I talk to people at, dinner parties or wherever, their perception of school sport is that it's all competitive, it's all only about the elite, and it's all about muddy playing fields and getting whacked with a piece of wood. They haven't seen the change that happened, and we haven't done enough of a good job of kind of getting that out. But personally, I don't see competition as bad. It's like everything, it's what we do with it, and it's a wonderful learning environment full of teachable moments if that's what we use it for. If it's for just finding out who's the fastest, who's the strongest, who's the quickest, which is the best school, it can be quite destructive.
Lisa.
Just to add, from a mental health point of view, we talk a lot about resilience, and that's what competition gives kids. Winning, losing, getting up, supporting your teammate, holding your head up high if you've missed a penalty, whatever it is, coming last in the race. Those are life lessons, aren't they? And they're really important life lessons as well.
I think there's a lot to be really encouraged about, but Rachel, I'd like to just touch on, we're talking here now and we're almost preaching to the converted. We know the message and we know how to get it out there in the community. But for you in particular, I'd like to spend a bit of time exploring who are those groups that we really need to reach? Who are those groups that are not accessing sport and engaging in sport, and why is it so important to connect with them?
Great question. So, I've got a few groups in mind who've spoken to me in terms of groups of students. Now, what I would say that's interesting about all the different groups of children that I might refer to now is all of them wanted to actually be involved and be active and be part of this physical, sports and activities world. So, I got 90 plus 1,000 responses from children with additional needs, and I spend a lot of time talking to children with disabilities who are particularly keen and particularly worried about their experience in lockdown. I think lots of kids with special educational needs are still waiting for assessments and are worried about not being able to get back to the active lives they want because it's been difficult. So I think that group is key to look at, and I think there's no lack of desire. They really want to. Certainly the girls, when we're talking about girls and particular groups of girls, so my Pakistani Kashmiri girls in Luton particularly were like, let us back. We've got to get out the house. We want to take part, we want these experiences, but it's got to be somewhere safe. And that's why the conversation around the extended day and communities or families of schools being able to create these spaces for them is really, really important. Again, that Bolton example was just a great example of where they'd done it. The actual, that school community had created a space where children's well-being and health and their sports and their activities could flourish. And it was by using the physical space and all the charities and support to make sure that they were open longer and able to do things and putting on things that were sensitive and appropriate. On the competition side, I just to sort of the development of character young people, teenagers, is just immense. And competitive sport can be so positive in that arena. My first school as a head teacher, I took over, I was a Tony Blair, under Tony Blair, a failing school that was turned into an academy. It was bottom 200 schools. And everybody says, oh, you were the most improved school in the country. How did you do it? And, you know, they expect me to talk to them about the extra maths lessons and whatever, which all did happen. But what we really harnessed was our kind of competitive spirit. I mean, we got the football team, we got them in fantastic outfits, we went and played the other schools, and when they won, you know, we taught them to be you know, gracious, and when they lost, we stopped them fighting. I went to every single football match, and I mean, it's a long time ago, and it sounds funny, but the development of character and pride and ethos are just immense. And school sports were a real way of hanging that, you know, we are something to be proud of. So, I mean, I don't think we should run away from that, or the lessons it teaches in terms of life is like this. You're often in competitive arenas, and you need to learn to be able to go in, play the game, compete, but then walk away, and it's dull, isn't it? That aren't they the lessons, and not let it go. So, I mean, I think in terms of character development and the development of the individual, there's some immense, you know, positives, and I've always used that in the most disadvantaged areas with, you know, and yes, sometimes we lose, and when we lose, we talk about that. And we, you know, it makes us better people, and we overcome it, and we try harder, and, you know. So I'm a great believer in, yeah.
Lisa, do you want to add to that?
I think just to reflect on what Rachel said, what you've described there, Rachel, are all the things that make a school culture. And, you know, culture and leadership go hand in hand, and they're the drivers of school improvement, and they're the bedrock of having places that staff and pupils want to go and want to be and are happy there. Thanks.
Kieran, it'd be interesting to know your thoughts on the future, because there's so much energy here, isn't there, about making that change. You know, you're there on the ground with kids day in and day out. What message do you think you'll be taking back after this conference to your kids?
There's a place in sport for everyone, even if you're not the best player, or if you're not here trying to be a professional athlete. There's somewhere for you to learn, develop, grow, and develop emotionally and as a person.
I couldn't put it better myself, really. I'm just wondering if there are any questions. We'll continue. I've got loads more to ask, but I wondered. Fantastic, yeah. I think Emily will rush round so that we can hear your question. Even better, Ali's there. So just introduce yourself and and go ahead with your question.
Of course, yeah. I'm Stephen Munday. I'm a lead head teacher ambassador with the Youth Sports Trust, help to oversee a multi-academy trust in Cambridgeshire, and president of the Chartered College of Teaching at the moment. And I'm sure, like everyone, really encouraged by this panel. It occurred to me, if there's a panel that's going to change the world, they're probably sitting in front of us, really, aren't they? So wonderful. I think I just want to express a personal confusion, but wonder how others see it, and it's to do with digital. And it is, what are we actually thinking and saying and doing about digital? Because at one level, is it, you're on your screens too much, put them down, get outside, run around and climb trees, etc. Because it sort of is at one level. And is it, if we're concerned about isolation and lack of socialisation, is it also get off those screens and go and socialise? And yet, on the other hand, isn't digital a fundamental positive way that socialisation can happen? Isn't it because of digital that the pandemic, dreadful as it's been, at least oversaw decent connectivity and education in many ways that just wouldn't have happened? Isn't the biggest issue the digital divide in some ways, and our concern was those who couldn't access, and yet we're saying you access it too much? Can't we use digital to increase and encourage physical activity, PE and sports, and yet we're doing digital too much? So this is a personal confusion, and I just, with these fine people here, I'm honestly, genuinely interested in hearing, what are we actually thinking and saying about digital? Because I just feel I might not be the only one who's a little bit confused about what are we trying to do and what are we saying and thinking.
Well, it was certainly exacerbated, wasn't it, Rachel, during the pandemic, and we had a huge reliance, particularly with homeschooling, with digital. And I think that's a perfect question, isn't it? Where's the messaging, and where do you stand on that?
Really good question, Steve. So, I mean, you know, I think I think there's before pandemic and after pandemic, and that we're never going to be the same again, are we? So there are some things that I really wouldn't want to let go. I think it's great that we've got Oak National Academy, that many of us who are educators are now thinking, we can make sure we've always got a digital curriculum offer, so if a child's off school they can actually catch up, they can see that lesson. There are some great things. The number of children with special educational needs who've said, actually it's been better for me to do some online learning, I can concentrate better, particularly some autistic children, some children with who need a lower stimulation in the afternoons, and schools are putting that into practice. And yes, our children are digital natives and use the internet. And I was just thinking the other day, I was somewhere without any connection to an internet and very bored for a few hours and thinking, gosh, I could be gamefully using this time to do things. Our children are the same. So I'm not digital doom. I think this is the world we live in, and it's great. And all those positives you picked up are great. But, and there are some big buts. One is, interesting what China's just done, isn't it? In terms of how much time they let children actually be on social media and tech. Now, I'm not proposing we be like China, and please don't quote me, but they've recognised the potential harms and online harms. I've been very involved and doing a commission on behalf of DCMS and DFE ministers on how to keep children safer online with the new online safety bill coming. We know we've got an unregulated space there where children can find themselves in incredibly difficult situations, whether it's been targeted, as the whistleblowers say, by algorithms, when you've got particular problems, eating disorders, issues like that, body image issues, whether it's getting into compulsive gaming and not being able to get out of it, and all the issues around loot boxes and things that our young people have to face, whether it's just parents, because for whatever reason, or carers, giving little ones digital devices, and leaving them with them for far too long, so that they're not actually talking and engaging in learning. So this has got to be one of those places, I think, where we recognise the good, but have to absolutely acknowledge the potential harms. And if it's playing outside, or a whole, or a day on your iPad, I'm going to go for outside, I'm afraid. But it doesn't have to be either or. But we need to bring back some balance, and that's why I'm very much in favour of age verification. I'm in favour of making sure the underage aren't on the tech sites. They are. Do you know that a massive percentage of our 11 to 13-year-olds who should not even be on tech sites are seeing hardcore porn for the first, at 11 years old and not knowing what they're seeing? This is a reality. If you're in schools, you know this. But, we need the tech companies to clean up their act. I have got a commitment from the big 8 tech companies. I've been holding them to account. They have to come and see me every 6 months, and I'm talking to them about both age verification, but also making sure that children get appropriate material for their age. They're only allowed to see that, and that they're protected from others. It is like getting blood out of stone trying to get any concessions, because these are major global businesses, but I will not stop.
Keep that fire going, Rachel. Keep it going. And if in doubt, CBeebies iPlay is brilliant. Lisa, what are your thoughts? Because it is a challenge in schools, isn't it? Whether it's bringing phones into the classroom, or actually a reliance on, playing the Nintendo Wii and doing activities at home. So it's that balance that we can't ignore. But what do you think are the challenges in the classroom?
So I think it's a challenge both in school and at home as a parent, and I think it is about the balance, which is basically what you've said. I'm, as well as being an educator, I'm a mum. My son is 9. He's the only boy in his class in year 4 that doesn't have a phone, and I am the most hated parent in the world because of that. But if you gave my son Harry the choice between a game of football outside with his mates or playing on his Xbox, even though he loves his Xbox, he would choose football absolutely every time. So I think it's about making sure that they've got the choices available. But also, kids get lost in gaming, don't they? So it's about parents taking responsibility for kicking kids off there when they've been on too long. And I do think there's a piece around parent education. So part of the reason that I don't want Harry to have a phone is because I don't feel completely fully versed to make sure that he's safe online. You know, and I'm a very experienced teacher and leader. It's a minefield, isn't it? So I think some simplified support for parents to help us keep our children safe online and allow children to collaborate and be together online in a creative way that means that they're not playing games on their own, I think it is something that we need to think about.
So many pressures in parenting. So thank you so much, Lisa, for actually sharing the pressures that you face as a leader in your field. I think that's so important. Ali, the messaging from the Youth Sports Trust then on those mixed messaging and emerging from that Zoom era of teaching, what do you think your vision is for children?
I think in terms of this digital space, kind of join the debate on this and the conversation, the point that Stephen's raised. I think there are two separate issues for me here. One is the productive versus the destructive technology thing. So we know that it can be really productive, and there are many ways in which technology, I'm wearing a Garmin, encourages us to be active and obviously has enabled us to stay connected during the pandemic. But there's also destructive stuff, and that's been raised on the panel. So it's not this isn't a kind of a one-dimensional issue that we're talking about. But the other thing is, again, as I understand it, we are physical, social, emotional beings. That's who we are. That's how we've kind of evolved over history. And although our lives have changed dramatically from, early civilization, we still have those three drivers in us. So our position, and as I talked about this morning, in a big strand cutting right through the middle of our strategy from 2022 to 2035, will be how do we keep balance in young people's lives? And importantly, how do we help, again, everybody recognise that technology is part of our lives. It's like when automated vehicles came in and we weren't walking. We kind of had to do some other things to counteract the impact of that on us not running everywhere and walking everywhere. We've just got to understand we're going through a huge evolution shift. It's the digital evolution, and that just forces some changes. But it needs to happen quicker than it is, and I think not just us as a nation, I think the world has sleptwalked into a disaster for young people with technology. When you were talking about your childhood, Rachel, I was thinking about when you used to go to the cinema, and if it wasn't a PG, you couldn't see it. And there's been no control on what's on the internet, as you say, and we've got to quickly react and perhaps not go as far as China, but actually put some sensible restrictions in. We don't let a child get into a car and drive it until they're a certain age. It's the same risk to their health and well-being. But I do think there are two issues here. Is I can see a future, and I would love to see a future where I walk into a sports hall or onto the athletics track and I see children engaging with technology to enhance the experience of sport. I would love to see that. But that's very different to gaming. And it's really different, actually, to e-sport, which is obviously coming at us as well. That's another conversation for another day.
Indeed it is. Are there any more questions from the audience? Yes.
Hiya. Thank you very much, everybody, by the way. But mine's around opening school facilities, and there was a lot of talk last night around opening school facilities, the HAF programme for children on free school meals. I'm just wondering, is there an acknowledgement and are there conversations happening at a higher level regarding school facilities? Because quite a considerable amount of schools don't own their own facilities, and therefore opening them in the holidays and at weekends and evenings is not necessarily the head teacher's decision. And if it is a decision, it costs quite a considerable amount of money to do that. So I just wondered if there was anything happening that sort of you knew of at a more senior strategy level around the opening of that, because managing the opening schools facilities money that came in last year, that was a huge barrier to 32 out of 32 of our secondaries in the city. I think the 25 of them are all privately owned schools, so we had a big sort of pushback from that. So I just wondered if there was anything that you knew of.
So I do know some stuff, if that's all right, Leah.
Of course.
The word on the street is that the delayed School Sport and Activity Action Plan will have the opening up of school sites and facilities as a strong theme in it. And you might remember that Boris Johnson announced £30 million just around about the Conservative Party conference in October to go into opening up school sites and improve teacher training in primary school. And we and probably a few other organisations that are here today were part of a briefing from the DfE. about the tender for the contract to spend some of that money on opening up school sites. And what it's due to build on is that earlier piece of work that Active Partnerships did last year. I think they had about £9 million to do some work. And this issue of, basically lots of schools were built under private finance initiatives where they don't have control of the site after a certain time, is now becoming clearer. I think it's one of those things, it's a bit like selling off the playing fields, where everyone has this assumption that playing fields have been sold off and that means we haven't got any playing fields. And while I would protect playing fields, a lot of the replacement with artificial turf has been much more playable than waterlogged pitches. But I think the same sort of simplicity is there at the moment, is that there are, I think something like 75% of our sports halls in this country are on school sites. So that's the majority of the provision. And there's an assumption that about 30% are open. So we should just open them without really understanding the issues. So this next tranche of money will be enabling whoever wins the contract to both get more school sites open where it's low-hanging fruit and then research the issues which are underpinning some of the harder to reach schools because of those PFI contracts.
Okay, so Rachel Redmond, I work for Multi Academy Trust. I am YST alumni. This won't be a difficult question. But my child starts school in September, so he will be the class of 2035. And during that period of time, we may have a minimum of 3 elections. So how do we, as a network and as an educationalist, how do we almost stop health and well-being being used as a political potato or being a policy? How can we help to make it sit outside of that? So actually, whatever the wave of government is, we will always place health and well-being at the heart of the school. And it's kind of, it's not a question or a statement, I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah. Lisa, would you like to add to that?
I think the answer is potentially the Welsh Schools movement and other things like that, where actually the power lies, by schools, for schools, and we own that. We own what we do because we are the people that do it. And actually that ground-up approach of brave head teachers to place wellbeing at the heart of what we're doing. Like you say, whichever government comes into power, we know what's best for our children. And if we help each other find our way through that collectively, as a group of schools in collaboration, then I don't think we'll go far wrong. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Rachel, as an independent force to be reckoned with, what would be your message to whichever government we shall see in the next few years?
It's almost more a message to us as educationalists and school leaders to say, I think many of us, Stephen and I are sitting here looking at each other, like feeling the pain, but many of us have worked for decades to give heads and trusts, but heads particularly, because they, the autonomy to decide, to lead the system, to decide what they should be doing, and to set if there's one, I cannot think of, it's the head teacher who sets the ethos and the culture of the school and says what is important. And I think part of the answer has to be us worrying less about Ofsted, being more confident in our own, decision making, and ensuring that government, respects and promotes both the head teacher's role, but also parents' wishes as well. I would say all the governments you're going to get will say they do that. And I think there's a level at which this one in a self-improving system, I know we always talk resource and money, and those are legitimate things, but we, as leaders, we set the ethos, and what you think is important is what's important. And
Ali, the Youth Sports Trust, 27 years in its, existence. You have seen different prime ministers and you've seen different funding. There must be such an appetite over the years now to embrace what you do, and that can only be hopeful.
You'd like to think so. I think after 27 years, what Rachel's just brought up there is it's been a political football. The place of PE and sport in schools has been a bit of a political football, certainly in the last 30-odd years. And almost that's because it's discretionary. So if I'm a minister and I want to play with school sport, I can. And if I'm not into it, then I don't have to. And that's the problem. So we might have lots of elections, but let's not forget elections are when people vote. And this is where again, where what I was talking about next door and our strategy is, we've been talking in an echo chamber for a lot of years with our 27 years. Yes, we've gradually grown the size of the echo chamber, but as we are today, we're talking to people to get it. And we've got to get out so that this is a matter of public opinion. Public have an opinion on what they think is right for their children, because they will choose where their child goes to school. They will be the ones that knock on the door of their head teachers, as head teachers know, and they will also be the people that vote for their MPs. So somehow we've got to get the public opinion on what children's health and well-being should be about verbalised. I mean, I would love to be able to do a repeat of the Big Ask with parents. What do you want for your children? So that we get that conversation going more in the public domain. Okay. You're doing one.
It's happening. It's an exclusive.
You heard it here first.
And I suppose in this whole messaging, it's looking to the heroes and you teachers and you heads. From me as a parent as well, you're the heroes in this story and you are the ones that drive it. And when I talk of heroes, I'm looking at Kieran too, because there'll be lots of kids, won't there, looking up to you and your messaging as you go back into the classroom about the importance, and it takes us right back to the beginning, isn't it? What do we need to take back to our young people, and what do we need to say to them in terms of encouraging them post-pandemic and what they will get out of sport?
Nothing I haven't already said, to be honest. Like, again, sport's an outlet for you mentally, physically and emotionally. It's the one thing that will be a consistent factor no matter what grade you may get in maths and English. Like, you always have sport that you can maybe not necessarily excel at, but it'll always be the social factor that will keep you going through certain things.
And Lisa, as a parent as well, I mean, it's so beneficial to get together with teachers, with parents as well. But for you, what will be the message from this conference as we push forward and we really, get our kids back out in the playground?
I think for me it's about making sure that everybody can find something that suits them, because not everybody wants to play traditional sport and not everybody wants to do the same kind of activities. So I think, going back to Rachel's earlier point about girls, it's about really thinking broadly and creatively about how can we get all children moving and being active in a way that suits them, in a way that they feel comfortable. And sometimes it's taking a stepping stone into a new activity that might then give them the confidence to try something else. So for me, I think it's about thinking creatively, thinking broadly, and meeting children and young people where they are.
And Rachel, you must be so infused from all the research that you've got, but what is your message moving forward about what we can all do to encourage children?
I mean, I would just say that the mental and physical health of England's children have been a national crisis, coming up lockdown, and should be a national priority. And I think it's as simple as that. It's a national priority, and whether it's resource, commitment, supporting you all to deliver it, it's number one priority. Simple as that.
And Rachel, 27 years, this conference after 2 years, after this long pandemic and lockdown, what's your vision for the future?
For vision for the future for the Youth Sport Trust.
Oh, sorry, that was for Ali.
Okay, I've been promoted. Did you want to answer that?
We love you.
So the vision is the vision we set out, that every child enjoys the benefits that come from playing sport. That's our vision. It has been enduring over the years. But I just touched on it this morning, and I would like just to finish on this, my final word. We now have driverless cars. 74% of business owners expect that they will be losing their lowest paid staff in the next 5 years because their roles will be automated. This whole point about the human era is coming, where what's going to be valued in society are the sorts of skills that we can build. They are already valued. We already know that the CBI and others say that the young people that they're receiving have got great exam results. They just don't have any of those life skills and interpersonal skills. That's going to get even more exaggerated. And the challenge is going to be those lowest paid workers, the ones whose jobs no longer exist, they're going to be the ones that are in school at the moment that we can help the most. We've kind of got a win-win here. We need to equip those young people, because the highly academic individuals and the scientists and the innovators, there will always be roles for those. There will always be jobs for those, because they'll be moving things on. For those people who are more likely to go into manual tasks, well, they need some real help with the life skills so they have a place in the workplace of the future. So for me, that's where I leave it. Let's get really thinking about what's going to be the world in 2035. And if we've got driverless cars now, goodness knows what we'll have in the future. And play and sport, as well as music and art and drama, are the places where we can equip young people for the future.
Indeed. Some really big themes that have come out today. Thank you so much for welcoming me to be part of this conversation. Ali Oliver, Youth Sports Trust CEO, Dame Rachel D'Souza, Children's Commissioner for England, Kieran Matthews, part of the Youth Sports Trust Board, and Lisa Feathers. Thank you so much for joining us. A big round of applause for the panel. And also for the wonderful questions from the audience. I believe that this was live streamed and it will be on the website to view back. Is that? So yes, if you want to view back and share, I think that's part of the way we can get this conversation lasting beyond here and now. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.